proceed this talk by saying it's going to be a continuation of Michael's talk. I am amazed at how well we take note of what's going on in the world and bring the news into our talks each day. I will begin with Bible verses, and the first one is from Genesis 18:14. Is anything too hard for God? And from Exodus 14:13, and Moses said unto the people, fear not, stand still, and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will show you today. From Psalms 112:7, he shall not be afraid of evil tidings, for his heart is fixed, trusting in the Lord. And from Luke, for with God nothing shall be impossible. We all have times in our lives when we feel very strongly that God is just so far from us, that there is something impossible about this situation, that God cannot or will not or is not going to take care of it. I would suggest to you, thank God anyway, because God can do whatever needs to be done in your life. With God, all things are possible. It's true, and you can prove it. We all meet with problems, and I like to call them projects, which we think are impossible to solve, and they are when we try to solve them alone. Take God with you. Let God help you solve your problem. Not long ago, the Berlin Wall went down. How impossible that seemed to us at the time. Long before it went down, I know all of us were thinking we could never get it down unless we had a shooting war. There were some shots fired. That didn't matter very much because the people in that country walked across that barrier, through that wall, unhampered. God was working there. Notice that happened as we began to pray for peace. Peace is possible. Was part of that transformational process. I remember telling people in a class that I had in Minneapolis that God could bring that wall down. That somewhere along the line, those prayers going up on the 31st of December would bring peace to this world, could bring peace to this world. Who would have guessed, just prior to that the two superpowers would be sitting down together trying to solve the problems of this world, working together to get the smaller nations. Who would have thought that the little Baltic states could demand their freedom and get it? Who would have thought that the Ukraine could become a sovereign nation? Think of that. Think how important that is. Somewhere along the line, our peace is possible. Our peace is possible prayers worked somehow or other when we got in touch with what our higher consciousness knew was true, that this world is a harmonious place, that this is a friendly universe, that it was demonstrated. Terry Anderson, I was so delighted to hear when they asked him, what was it that kept him going all those years? One of his remarks was, my faith and the prayers of the people in the world. And I heard him say this so emphatically. Prayers were an important part of his process. It was an important part of his survival. It was his faith. He said, it was my faith. Marvelous, wonderful way to put it, because what it does is give validity and power to our prayers. It lets us know that somebody prays even when they're in what might be called an impossible situation. In other words, he was contacting God because he knew God could do it. He knew God could take care of it. He knew, and the people that were praying for him, Think of how faithful his sister was in trying to get him out of this situation. Lest we think that I'm going to talk all about world affairs, no. I've got to bring my family and a personal experience in this because I know that God works. And I'll tell you about a little situation that happened when I was a little girl. It established my faith in God beyond belief. And I've never doubted God's care for me. All I doubt is my ability to listen to what he wants to tell me. You know, every now and then, I can't quite hear what he's trying to tell me. Okay, to get back to the little demonstration on our part. And this was a joint demonstration among our family. One November night, when I was a little girl, my father came home and announced to my mother that the money that he was going to give to her to run our house for the next 2 weeks had fallen out of his pocket, and he did not know where it was. Now, he knew that he had it when he got off the bus, so he knew that it had to be somewhere on the block that he walked to get to our house. Well, you can imagine that it caused my mother some little concern, and she was a little upset about this, but then after she began to get her act together, why she told us that, girls, my father now wasn't the most praying individual on earth. I think he was a meditator in a certain sense, but he wasn't a prayer. He didn't turn to prayer like my mother did, bless her heart. And so she said, girls, we'll pray about this. Now, we were tiny little girls. I would suppose I wasn't over 5 or 6 years old, maybe 7. Anyway, the next morning she got up after we had prayed about all of this, and she said to my father, I think you better call the paper and put a want ad in the lost and found section, telling where your money was lost, and you know, just our telephone number, so that if it's been found, they can bring it back or call it. Within 24 hours, my mother and father got a call that money had been found about a block and a half away from our house, among the leaves that the neighbors were raking, and that they wanted to return it to us. Now, this money had absolutely no identification on it, and it was a fall day, and leaves were heavy. When you think of how impossible that situation is, it just befuddles you, boggles your mind. The leaves could have covered the money because it wasn't very big amount of money. It was the amount of money, but there weren't many bills. Somebody could have picked that up off the street when they were walking down, because it's a pretty long walk, and people take that bus, and they're there. It could have been blown away. It could have been blown away. Or the people that found it in the leaves could have been so impressed with finding the money that they could have felt that this was God's bounty for them. They didn't. They looked in the want ads for 2 days back because they wanted to be sure they didn't miss that if it was in there. And when they found my mother and our telephone number and the call about it, or the notice about it, they were thrilled. They really wanted to return that money. Of course, my mother and father rewarded them for it, but it was just the idea. Think how impossible. And from that day to this, I know that with God, all things are possible. I'll tell you that Myrtle Fillmore writes about this in her book, Healing Letters. She says, so we rejoice and remember that we have the God power to change conditions, and I would add impossible situations. The God love to express Christ-likeness, and we work lovingly and diligently with whatever we find ourselves in or our environment that falls short, keeping the attention centered in the Christ mind, where you're able to see beyond the appearances to the impulses of the soul, which is always urging us in our efforts to make use of what God has given. In other words, just think if my mother or my father had felt that it was impossible to put that ad in the paper. To the degree that we let the Christ be lifted up, and in the same degree shall we rid ourselves of that which may have been pronounced incurable, and I would add impossible, or may have seemed to us a disease that was incurable, or I would say a situation that was impossible. Let us more and more remember that that which Jesus Christ said, with God, all things are possible. And let us listen until we hear within, is there anything too hard for Jehovah? Nothing is too difficult for God. Prayer and meditation will get you over the hill. Prayer and meditation will allow you to hear God's voice speaking to you. With God, all things are possible. I've proved it, the world proves it, and you can prove it. God bless you. Hey, dear heart, thank you for telling me. I forgot all about that thing.
Marcella Lundgren is next, friends. The title of her Bible series, Free at Last.
Good morning.
Good morning.
It's still morning, and I'm delighted that it is, because I love to greet people in the morning. Today we're going to start out on an adventure through a series of lessons taken from, or using as the basis of the lessons, the 15th chapter of Luke, the 11th to the 32nd verses, which are the story of the prodigal son. I hesitate calling this the prodigal son story because the story is so rich with other characters, and there's so much going on in this story except the waster, or the spending of money foolishly. For our first lesson, we're going to talk about freedom. We're going to talk about what makes you free. One thing that'll make you free. And then the second lesson is going to be about emotions and what this story tells us about emotions and how important our emotions are. The third story will be that ever-present prosperity lesson that we like to include in every one of our talks, in every one of our series. And the fourth lesson is going to be a sharing with you of the things that I have learned in trying to put together a sort of a packet about what the prodigal son story teaches us. Because there are so many articles written in the Unity publication about the prodigal son. And each one of them has just a little bit of a different color, a little different lesson to teach. And you'd be surprised how many things there are in this story. I'm not going to tell the story in its entirety to begin with, because as I go through these lessons, I'm going to probably go through the same story over and over again, showing where the lessons lie in the story. But it is a story about two young men and their father. The youngest of these children, and it could be two young daughters and their mother, or a mother and two sons, or a father and two daughters. And I'd love to change the gender of this story, but it's too much work. I'd begin to talk about the son and meeting the daughter, and you get all thrown off. So no need to do that at this point. Anyway, the Bible story is about two young boys and their father. The youngest of these young boys wants to have part of his fortune that the father will give him eventually, given to him, so he can go away and live it up in a faraway country. Sounds kind of familiar, doesn't it, in some cases? The father is willing to give him the money, and he does, and he, of course, winds up feeding swine because he has spent all the money in the far country. He even eats some of the husks that that he's feeding the swine, because he's so poor, so deprived, so impoverished. Finally, it dawns on him, as it does all of us, if he would turn around and go back to his father's house, ask for forgiveness, and agree to be one of the servants in his father's house, at least he'd have the bare necessities. Now remember that. He wants to go back, ask forgiveness, and become a servant. So he goes back, starts back. When he's a ways from the house, his darling father greets him, comes to greet him. And now we are going to find out what will make us free. Because I'm going to show you in this story how forgiveness frees us up. The lesson will be free at last. We can forgive and be free. Two parts of forgiveness are illustrated when the boy meets his father on the road. Apparently, between the time he left his place of employment in the far country and the meeting of his father, he has come to the notion that he can forgive himself. that he can get himself a good dose of self-forgiveness, which is something we have to learn very early on in the game. Because remember, what you see is what you are. And if you're always being unforgiving, if you're always condemning and damning, it's because you haven't forgiven yourself. Once you learn to forgive yourself, you can forgive others very easily because you know that you've forgiven yourself. So when he meets his father, being a servant in the house is never mentioned. He just asks his father for forgiveness and that he wants to become part of the family again. Now, let's take a look at the father. The father isn't in the slightest interested in forgiving the son. He isn't the slightest interested in condemning that son. He never even mentions anything about, what did you do with the money? How come you're so poor? You know, he doesn't make any condemning remarks. He simply greets the boy, puts new clothing on his back, and prepares a feast for him. Think of the freedom this father has, not needing to forgive, because he doesn't see the need to forgive. Well, there's a party going on, and you remember there were two boys. There's one boy that stays home. The father notices that the boy that stays home is not at the party, so he goes out and tries to find him, and he does. And of course, the boy that stays home is full of remorse, self-pity. How come he gets what I, should have? How come my father never did this for me? What necessity was it? The boy was always home. Anyway, the father asks him to join the party. This young chap is so unforgiving, so remorseful, so jealous, so envious, that he doesn't even refer to the son that returned home as his brother. He refers to him as your son. Think how harsh. Now let's consider what this unforgiveness is doing in just this little story in the Bible. Because this story is very short, it's only about 21 verses long, and as Bible stories go, that's kind of short. He deprives himself of a party, and he deprives himself of enjoying the inheritance he already has in his father's house, because he can't recognize it, he can't see it, he can't appreciate it. He can't feel grateful. He can't feel grateful that his brother is safe and sound and coming home, all because he can't be forgiven. Charles Fillmore tells us we should never go to sleep at night until we forgive all those who have anything against us, or that we have anything against them. But more important, remember, when Jesus made the Lord's Prayer, one of the points in the Lord's Prayer is forgive us our debts as we have forgiven our debtors. Forgiveness is so important that he included this in the prayer that is said to cover all our essential needs. Now, Jesus never wasted time telling us things to do that were unimportant. So if he said, forgive us our debts, and made that something that we are to stay, for some of us, it's daily, think how important forgiveness is. If Charles Fillmore tells us to forgive, and to go to bed, not to go to bed at night without forgiving, think how important it is. I would tell you that it's so important to forgive. Forgive is the thing that frees you up. It lets you know a certain sense of freedom that you can get no other way. God wants you to forgive. God doesn't have any need to forgive us because he can't. We should all really try to develop the spirit of the Father in this story, who doesn't see any need to condemn. Think how important it is. Think how freeing that is. Think of the burden that you take off your shoulders when you know that there's really no need to forgive. But if there is a need, to be forgiving. And I bless you.
All right, Marcella Lundgren. And the title of her Bible lesson this morning, Give God Pleasure. Great title.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Why not give God pleasure? Give God all the pleasure God is capable of. In this four-part series, we're discussing the prodigal son story, but I'm going to couple this one with a verse from Luke 12:32, which says, "Fear not, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom." Why not give God all the pleasure? Allow him or her to give you the kingdom. Because it is God's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Whenever or whatever you have a need, God can supply it. God has infinite resources with which to bless mankind. I read that for years and years and years and knew it. And I have proved it time and again. Now, with respect to the prodigal son story, how did these three characters, and they were really characters, you know, if you really think about it, characters in the quotable state, because each one of them was such a special person to each one of us who studies the story. The first son knew that he had abundance, was very sure of it. Let's consider it. First, he took his inheritance from his father. He never doubted but what his father could share with him, the money that he had coming, an inheritance. And he went into the far country and he spent all this money. Not a very good steward, but on the other hand, he did have the money to spend and he got rid of it. Probably a little bit more hastily than we would approve of, but nevertheless he did. When he got into a situation that he wasn't very happy with, he had to go out and find a job, which he did. Pigsty wasn't a very good job, but he got a job. And then it occurred to him, wait a minute, I don't need to remain here. I can improve my situation by going back to my father. And he did. He traveled down the road, and of course, his father met him. And he supplied him with all the good things. Because he said to himself before he started home, if I go back to my father, I will have enough and to spare. In other words, he knew where his abundance lay. He knew where his abundance was. And he could give God the pleasure of giving him all the things he needed. Now let's consider the father. The father who never doubts that he has enough money, enough supply. Oh, and by the way, we want to talk about prosperity now in the context of having everything we need for our well-being. Not necessarily just money. Although I'll tell you, having been in the banking business, we always used to say money's so far ahead of everything else that, you know, and it does supply. You know, it does supply. Whatever is second, you know, sort of secondary, really secondary. However, and money can't buy a lot of things. So we want to know that prosperity means having a sense of well-being. We all know people who have a sense of well-being and they don't have very much. They always seem to be able to share. They always seem to be able to give. Now, let's go back to the father. The father who always knew where his supply was, always knew that God was his source, could supply to his son who wanted to spend money recklessly, could supply to that son what he wanted, who always knew where his supply was so that when the boy came back, he could welcome him back and never ask him a question about where the money went or how can we spend all this money, but welcome him back with generosity, giving him clothing and jewelry, so they gave him a ring, and gave him a place to stay, and prepared a party. The father who knew that God was always his source. Then we have that rascal, that's second son, you know, that chap that just couldn't welcome back his brother, who really had sort of a limited idea of supply, and yet he was like the fish swimming in the ocean. He was right in the middle of all that supply. Okay, she wonders where the water is. You know, his supply is always around him. Son, thou art ever with me, and all that I have is mine. The father, again, telling us that he knows where his supply is, and all that he has is his son. The father never doubting that he can share with that son also, and with his other son, and still have enough. Think of the wonderful ideal prosperity that is. Think of how great that father is in his feeling of prosperity. Think how assured he is that he will always have what he needs. Now, of course, it's wonderful to talk about all this prosperity, and it's wonderful to say that these people have expressed prosperity one way or another. But how do we get it? How do we achieve this for ourselves? Because, of course, the story is not very much good if it can't be applied in our own life. Well, I would suggest to you that we learn and we hear a lot about denial and affirmation. Let us deny that we can ever be separated from our source. Let us affirm that this universe is just teeming with ideas for us to use, and all we need to do is connect with those ideas. And we can connect with them if we will take a few moments each day to affirm and to listen to what God is trying to tell us. Sometimes it means that we might have to go over the cliff into that abyss. But you know what they tell us? When we go over that cliff, we're either going to do one of two things. We're either going to find something firm to fall down on and stand on, or we're going to be taught how to fly. Now, I'd sort of like to learn how to fly. I mean, I've stepped off and gotten on a firm ground often enough. I'd rather not learn how to fly. I'd like to be that little water bug that became that wonderful fly. Let us take time to get connected with our source and know that God is always in charge of our life. Prayer and meditation does not necessarily have to be long. It doesn't necessarily have to be an enforced sitting in a position for a long time. It can be as you are walking up and down these halls, as you are walking back and forth through your car, as you are blessing your meal. Eric Butterworth has an interesting statement in one of his books, and I read it over the weekend just to show you how God does supply to us what we need to know. He said there is 10 minutes of every day that are the most important 10 minutes of our life, of each day. 5 minutes in the morning, 5 minutes at night. 5 minutes before you get out of bed, and 5 minutes before you go to sleep. Those 5 minutes are to be spent thanking God, getting in touch with our source, affirming that we have all the supply we will ever need. Turn around. Open up your awareness and never doubt that you are an heir of a wealthy parent whose pleasure, remember, it is God's pleasure to give you the kingdom. God bless you. My talk today is Thank God Anyway. And I'm going to take part of my Bible reading from Ecclesiastes, the third verse, the third chapter, the first 8 verses. To everything there is a season and a time to every purpose under heaven. A time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck that which is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to get and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to cast away, a time to rend and a time to sow, a time to keep silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time to war and a time of peace. In other words, we have various seasons of our life, and we might just as well expect them. And during whatever season we are going through, I maintain we should give thanks to God anyway. No matter how terrible things seem to be you really can give thanks to God. You can give thanks that you have the opportunity to prove once again that there is one presence and one power operating in your life. We all have times when we feel that we'd like to give up, that it's about time to just quit, and that's just the time we want to learn to give thanks to God anyway. I learned a lesson about this from a tree in the front yard of the apartment that I'm living in, because it is right outside the sliding glass doors, and I can see it. During the first part of March, we had some lovely, lovely weather. It was about 80 degrees, and things were just sprouting all around. And this blessed, gorgeous tree started to bloom. It really was doing a good job of growing. Leaves were coming out, and little pink buds were showing their faces. And I thought, oh, this is going to be just like home. I have a tree like this in my yard, and I rejoice every year when it blooms. And then all of a sudden, one morning, I woke up, and it had snowed. And not only had it snowed, but it was cold. Now, we get snow on our trees when they leaf out and when they bloom sometimes in Minnesota, but that's just a minor matter, and those trees just kind of do it. You know, they just take it. They don't bother with it. But here, this poor little tree shriveled up. And I said to myself, my goodness, is this tree going to not bloom this year? I'm looking forward to seeing those blooms. They're pink. It's a crabapple tree, I think. You know, there are all kinds of trees that bloom, and sometimes I don't know the names of them, but the one at home is a crabapple, and this looks like that kind of a tree. Well, I waited and looked at the tree and really blessed it and told it how darling it was and that I really wanted it to bloom. I don't know whether I had anything to do with it, but within about 10 or 15 days, it was showing signs of growing again. And oh, was I grateful. Now I have the most gorgeous, flowering, I think, crabapple tree anywhere. And I didn't go to church. I missed Ross yesterday because I was just so pleased to have that blooming tree. In other words, that tree didn't give up. It thanked God. You know, I said to myself as I was thinking about what was going on with that tree, I thought, so many things in our life are the same way. We start out, we work so hard, we think that the blooming season is right at hand. Everything, the weather, or whatever is going on in our life, just seems to be the most wonderful thing that you could ever imagine. And then all of a sudden we get a blast of winter again. A blast of cold, a blast of uncomfortableness. And we wonder, you know, what can I do? Where am I going? How can I work out of this thing? Well, in Thessalonians, the 5th chapter, the 16th, 17th, and 18th verses, we have the recipe for all of this. It says, rejoice evermore, pray without ceasing, in everything give thanks, for this is the will of God in Jesus Christ concerning you. Rejoice evermore. When you get that blast of winter in your life, give thanks. You know, just rejoice. Keep on rejoicing. But always remember to pray without ceasing. Forgot to put my tape on again. What you want to do is pray and keep on praying. Meditate and keep on meditating. I wonder if that tree had any intelligence. I hope it did. I hope it sent up a message sometimes that I send up, and it says, God, you're sending me mixed blessings here, mixed messages. I can't understand what you're trying to tell me. But you know, when I do that, somehow or other I know, after the whole thing is over with, why I had to go through that bit of hell, that bit of uncomfortableness. And I see that message very clearly. So I have learned when I have a bit of a problem, when I get into a bit of a mess, when I get into something that I'm not exactly comfortable with, to pray without ceasing, to rejoice evermore, and to continue to give thanks. Because I know that works. I have a deep, deep conviction in my life. One of the reasons that I came into Unity was because I resonated very well with there is one presence and one power. One presence and one power working in my life. And that I am a channel through which that power can work. I can work with that power, and it can work in my life. I wonder sometimes how the Fillmores felt about when they came out here and started to build this village. And in the 1930s, they had to move back to Kansas City because the economic conditions were not conducive to building anything. I wonder how they felt when they said, we've got to pack it in, we've got to go. I wonder how that worked in their life. I know for myself that I had a similar situation. I had a job that I really didn't like very well, but there was nowhere for me to go. I had to stay there. I had to work at that job. It was important that I keep on. I had been there too many years, and yet I knew that I needed to make some changes. I had to pray a lot. Let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, dear ones, I prayed and I prayed, and I prayed for about 2.5 years. And when the situation finally ended, when it finally resolved itself, everything blossomed just like that little tree in my yard. It blossomed so well that I cannot tell you. And for that, I am eternally grateful. We also have something in Romans. From the 8th chapter, the 28th verse, it says, we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are the called according to his purpose. When I first came upon that verse many years ago, I had to become acquainted with to them who are called according to his purpose. And I really had to resonate with that before I could get to the first part of the verse, which said, we know that all things work together for good to them that love God. If my purpose, if God is working through me, then I have no problem. I have to check to see, am I doing the things that God wants me to do? Am I doing what I have been told in meditation and prayer to do? I would also point out to you that in this verse we read all things, not some things, not the little things, not the big things, not when we've been good and not when we've been especially prayerful, not when we've done something wonderful for somebody else, but all things, everything, no matter what, work together for good in our lives. If I don't leave you with anything else, I want you to know that you can thank God anyway, in the bad things, in the good things. You can rejoice evermore. You can be grateful to God. God bless you. Pleasure to see you all here. I really appreciate your coming. Today we're going to talk about, and the title of my talk is Jesus, Myrtle, and Charles. I was going to put Jesus, Myrtle, Charles, and me, but then I decided that that was elitist company, and I really, they deserved more than me as a fourth partner. But they are, and they're wonderful, wonderful mentors, people in this movement. Jesus said we could do as he did. I think it's time we got started with the process of healing. We waste our time so much, not doing those things that Jesus asked us to do. You can tell I was in a hurry. This is the Bible I decided to take today. Can you believe it? I've got such a gorgeous one at home. But it's kind of fun. It says in John 14, the 12th verse, most assuredly I say to you, he who believes in me, the works that I do, he will do also, and greater works than these he will do, because I go to my Father. Jesus said greater works. Now, I am not altogether sure that I know exactly how to deal with greater works when the resurrection was just about the greatest work in the world. But just about, folks, no, it was the greatest. But Jesus said we could do it. And I take Jesus at his word. So I think we can heal as he healed. As he healed. Now, Jesus tells us how he healed. When he called his 12 disciples to them, he gave them power to cast out unclean spirits. And then it says, when he was coming into Nazareth, so he got into a boat and crossed over and came to his own city. And behold, they brought to him a paralytic laying on a bed. And Jesus, seeing their faith, now remember the word faith, said to the paralytic, Son, be of good cheer, your sins are forgiven you. And at once some of the scribes said within themselves, this man blasphemes. But Jesus, knowing their thoughts, said, why do you think evil in your hearts? For is it easier to say your sins are forgiven you, or to say arise and walk? Just think for a moment. You have to have faith for spiritual healing. A faith built up over a period of time. That faith that heals spiritually does not come with one healing. That faith comes over a long period of time. And then he said, your sins are forgiven you. You know, in Unity, we have a wonderful idea about sin. Sin is not the big deal that it is in the Orthodox churches. Sin is something we do. Okay, folks, let's just take the episodes that went on here just before we came in, before I started this talk. Sin is missing the mark. I missed the mark. My outline of this talk is in my car, typed up and beautifully photographed, but it wasn't here. I missed the mark. Am I going to lose my cool and get all excited and nervous about that? No, I'm going to make another copy. Thank God I had another blank copy with me. But that's sinning. No more important than any other thing we do in our life, except that when it causes us to be sick, we want to correct it. Go and sin no more, Jesus told the paralytic. He didn't tell him to do more than just change your thinking. Forget your sin. And he also, wise Jesus, did not tell us what sin this man was supposed to quit doing. Because you see, when we outline what causes a sickness, as so many of these wonderful writers that we have do, then whenever we see somebody having arthritis or gallbladder trouble or fat thighs, if you want to call them, or any of the other things, we say, well, that must be caused by, and then we attach it in her or his thinking. Folks, it's none of your business what's going on in their thinking. They are dealing with that themselves. You have all you can do to handle yourself. You have more than enough to do. Jesus also told us that we were to mind our own business. He tells us to shake the dust off our feet when people don't want you around, don't want you to talk about this healing. You know, you're so much better off if you just do the healing work and let your example tell the story. Healing is just too important an activity in our life to be left to chance or left alone. We need to learn to heal spiritually in this world, folks. We really do. Now, in preparation for this talk, I almost really drove myself crazy. I read both Myrtle Fillmore's books, Healing Letters and How to Let God Help You. And I would ask you, if you do not have them and have not read them, to take time to read them. Because in them, Myrtle tells us how to heal spiritually, how to get rid of all the pills we take and all those appendages. Myrtle was the original healer. She knew how to heal herself. She healed others. She was the healer in the group, of the pair. movement that was founded by both Myrtle and Charles perhaps would have been very little if it had only been left up to Myrtle, because I don't think she would have gotten the organization going. Charles is the one that promoted that and did that. But he also was a healer. And they both did something that is very important. Before they went out and tried to heal others, they healed themselves. They showed how it could be done. They did not tell us not to go to doctors. They did not tell us not to take the medicines. They did not tell us anything. They said, this is how it can be done. If you want to do it, that's fine. It's up to you. And the growth, of course, will come, as it always does, if we work with it. We weren't going to confuse Charles with Jesus now. Charles tells us. And this is what Charles says about healing. All healing is based on mental cleansing. When the mind is free from error thoughts, harmony in the body ensues. Permanent healing is never accomplished until the mental cause of disease, the error thought, is removed. Jesus was the true healer. And when he cast out error that caused the condition, he said, sin no more, lest a worse thing befall thee. The thing was caused by sin. Thus, the true way to heal is to find the mental cause and destroy it forever. I'd like to point out to you that once you are healed spiritually, you never have that problem again. It is gone, folks. And the reason it's gone is whether you know it or not, you have removed some mental condition. Something in your thinking has gone. And it works, folks. It works. Charles and Myrtle proved it over and over again in the beginning of this movement. Why we are so forgiving of looking to other places, I will never understand. But I am in this movement to promote spiritual healing. Why? Well, the story is, physician, heal thyself. And I will assure you that I have been healed. Now, this is not said with bragging. This is not said to impress anyone. This is said in the light of proof that it can be done. I got into Christian Science when I was 11 years old. From that day until this, I have never been to a doctor. And I am old enough so that I could have mothered almost everyone in this room. Let me tell you, I will guarantee you that. Not that I am so old. Let it go at that. I just started earlier than everybody else. I haven't been to a doctor, and I do not take pills. I took my last aspirin tablet when I was a little over 20 years old. And I remember what happened when I took that last aspirin tablet, folks. I was so blessed sick that the man that I was out with at that time thought I was going to die. He couldn't haul me home and hand me over to my mother fast enough. But I made up my mind that that was the end of it, folks. I have had some startling healings. Time does not allow me to tell about them. I will talk with anybody who wants to talk about them. I believe that my good health, oh, and by the way, I also would tell you that I worked for about 100 years for a bank in Minneapolis, and I never missed a day of work because I was ill. Now, I took my vacation time, and every now and then I took a day off, but that was not because I was sick. Any one of you can do the same blessed thing. There's no reason why you can't. I'm no exception to the rule. Healing, spiritual healing, is possible to anyone. Now, you don't start, waiting for the cancer to come. You start when you have a cold, or a stomach ache, or a headache, or whatever on the small scale. And you say, wait a minute now. Jesus healed without the use of medicine. He accommodated the folks, and he gave them the privilege of using medicine by rubbing some clay over somebody's eye. one time. And he did prove that he could get angry, so he chased the people out of the temple. But for the most part, his healings were simply, be thou healed. Go and sin no more. Thy sins are forgiven thee. And we remember, sin is not the great, tremendous wrong. It is something that you're not doing right. If you add 2 and 2 is 5, you're not doing it right. All you do is change, and you say 2 and 2 is 4. It's possible to do it. Anybody and everybody can do it. It's just one of those things that we neglect to do. And one of those things that has not been stressed all that often in the unity movement. We can do it. Anyone can do it. It's a wonderful, marvelous thing to do. Jesus has told us we could, and we can. I have been healed, and I really don't want to belabor this point, but I really think that it is important that people know that I know what I'm talking about. I've been healed of something that doctors said could not be healed, except by an operation. And it's gone, folks. I did not go to the doctors. My family was so concerned about me, and it was so obvious and so evident. And they wanted me to do something. And they wondered if there was some medicine that I would take. Well, what they didn't know was if they'd brought it to me, I wouldn't have. I really didn't care. If I couldn't prove this to myself, then I couldn't teach it, and I wanted to be a teacher. I am not a healer, and I won't be a healer, I don't think. I want to be a teacher, and I want to be able to teach people, anybody, everybody, that healing, spiritual healing is possible. You can do it. Jesus did it. And it's too important an aspect of this movement to be neglected. God bless you all on your healing path.
And the title of her lesson, From Copernicus to
Siegel.
Siegel. And what I'll do is, you got 15 minutes for this talk, so at 13 I will hear White, and at 15.
Thank you very much for coming this afternoon. I really appreciate your attendance. We are living in the most exciting and perhaps the most revolutionary time in the life of the Christian church. This is important to unity people because it is what our founders wrote about from the beginning of the movement and what has attracted so many people to the unity movement and to its teachings. From the time of Copernicus and Galileo, the compatibility of religion and science has caused problems for both religion and science. Science has thought of religion as that it did not give enough respect to the teachings and the efforts of science. Religion, on the other hand, doesn't want to subject itself to the scrutiny of science. Religion, the Christian religion, has the Bible as its authority, and for many people that is the answer, and science really has a tough time trying to convince people that the Bible isn't the sole authority for so many things. So we have a dichotomy, and both camps seem very much unwilling to give in to giving up their cherished beliefs. The Bible in the Christian church is a holy book, and it is a holy book, and we consider it in unity a holy book. We consider it a story of our life. The story starts with the creation and goes on through the Old Testament and then picks up a different theme in the New Testament in that it teaches about the love of God and the grace of God. In the Bible, we make progress. And if we read the Bible, we see how we can make progress. The story of Cain and Abel in Genesis is one story that will give us a good example of what we mean by learning from what the Bible teaches. The story is in the 4th chapter of Genesis, and it shows the futility of jealousy and envy, and how important it is to watch that we do not become envious of other people. You will remember that Cain killed Abel because he was jealous of what Abel presented to God as a gift of the first fruits, instead of going and figuring out what would make his gift to God more presentable, he simply killed him. Of course, Cain was then banished from Nod and had to go on and live a life tilling the soil. Now, we know that the New and the Old Testament are our guides, and we use that, and the Bible is our guide. Science, on the other hand, requires that we do things a bit differently. Science would ask us to prove what we are believing in. And, of course, that is why scientists and Bible students can't really get along. The Bible is of the heart, is of the feeling nature, and science is of the intellect. This is not to say that scientists aren't feeling people, and this is not to say that religious people aren't intellects. It simply means that you take the Bible on faith. And Jesus asked us to do this. He said in Mark 10:15, "Verily I say unto you, whoever shall not receive the kingdom of God as a little child, he shall not enter therein." In other words, we are to have the faith of a child in order to take the teachings of the Bible. Faith is the important thing as far as the Bible is concerned and as far as religion is concerned. But Jesus didn't exactly leave us there. Jesus said something else, and I think people who have a scientific background could use this to their advantage. In the 16th chapter of John, the 12th verse, he said, "I have yet many things to say to you, but you cannot bear them now." In other words, I think with Jesus' wonderful mind, with his advanced thinking, he knew that there were many things that the Bible did not contain, and that we should be willing to take them into consideration. Advances in science make this a better world in which to live. Science is the means by which we live longer, live more productively, live more comfortably than our ancestors. It is the reason there is enough food in the world to feed anyone and everyone. It isn't a matter of not enough. It's a matter of poor distribution. And as soon as science can figure out how to get this food around the world, there will be enough food to feed everyone. Science may not have been necessary to discover the continents of the world as Columbus did, but it took science to enable us to see world from outer space. We cannot live without science. Science and religion are coming together rather slowly. There are individuals and groups who do a good job of bringing science and religion together. Spindrift in Salem, Oregon is one of those organizations. Now, Spindrift does not deal with individuals. It is dealing with biology and botany. They have planted seeds in trays and prayed over them. The seeds in the control group, or the group that is not prayed over, did not sprout nearly as well in the first experiment as did the seeds that were prayed over. And I might add that the prayed over seeds were prayed over by Protestants and Catholics and using various kinds of prayers. Nobody was told how to pray. The seeds sprouted very well. There was another experiment made by these same people, and they experimented with seeds that were stressed or not expected to sprout very well, very much. They prayed over a control group and a group that was, they had one group that was a control group and not prayed over, and then they had the group that was prayed over. It's surprising that the seeds that were prayed over sprouted abundantly, more abundantly than the seeds in the first group that were perfect and were expected to sprout no matter what. The Spindrift group also tested directed and non-directed prayer. Non-directed prayer is the "thy will be done" type of prayer. Whatever happens, happens. That prayer produced the best results. Well, now how does all this affect us, we say? Well, for one thing, it is of interest that these are scientifically replicated experiences that prove prayer works. Now, the medical field knows that prayer works, and every now and then they admit it. They might call it meditation, visualization, or by some other means, some other name, but it is still prayer in a certain sense. Norman Cousins was the first one, and his book, Anatomy of an Illness, started the ball rolling. There are others, and I would suggest you read Paul Pearsall, who wrote Superimmunity. Bernie Siegel has a couple of books, and Larry Dossey has Recovering of the Soul. All of these people prove that thoughts and prayers and meditation have power in the control of and healing of the sick. Dr. O. Carl Simonton leads the field in cancer research, and he proves that the power of thought and of visualization. He has stated in a recent interview, our bodies respond to the way we live, particularly our emotional relations to life. He goes on to say that there is a natural healing mechanism in the body, and knowing this helps us to take charge of the fear that would defeat that healing process. So religion and science are discovering the importance of our thinking to the health of mankind. Religion must welcome the use of science, and in turn, science must welcome the evaluation that it can give. Franklin Lohr, who is a noted theologian, has written a book, and I would recommend this to anyone who wants to find out what science and religion is what religion as a science is all about. This booklet tells us that sooner or later, science and religion have to come together. Much of what we have learned long ago, he says in this book, is no longer sufficient. This includes science as well as religion. The authority of the fathers is being questioned. Tradition is being challenged. Personal experience is proving what is true and what is false. Speculation is bringing up all kinds of ideas. Intuition is telling us that we are on the right track, and revelation is telling us to forge ahead with these new ideas. Franklin Lohr would have us establish a science of religion. And science and religion are not as far apart as some people might think. Charles Fillmore encouraged science and religion and the participation of both in the religious beliefs. In Christian Healing, he said, there is a science in Christianity and it is only through the understanding of this science as a fundamental of Christianity that the Christ teachings can be fully demonstrated in the life of man. There is a gulf between high spiritual understanding and material manifestation, and it is only by bridging this gulf that science and religion can be reconciled. Science and religion working together may change the way the Bible is interpreted for many religious organizations, and they may not welcome this. But remember, Jesus said, I have many things to tell you, but you cannot bear them now. A generation ago, Alfred North Whitehead pointed out in Science and the Modern World, we are entering into a new age of reconstruction in religion, in science, and in political thought. Pope John Paul wrote, we are not meant to be prisoners of the past. Rather, we are to be pioneers of an exciting future. And think how wonderful it is that a Catholic Pope would tell us that we are not to be prisoners of the past. We're to be pioneers. Charles Fillmore tells us in his book, Prosperity, when we read statements about some of the recent discoveries of science, which everyone accepts and talks about, we are truly amazed. Such statements made by religionists would be called preposterous and unbelievable. Yet religion has been making the same statements in different ways for thousands of years. Now science is helping religion by proving them. So we see that there is a meeting of minds. And if only the participants in each camp would recognize it and come to work together, they could find a meeting ground. Sometimes current events play a part in the evolution of an idea whose time has come. Crisis and devastation produce answers required by both religion and science because they force answers. Everyone might not experience the same crisis. Not everyone is down in Florida, for instance. Not everyone is over in Somalia where they're starving. But those crises are very real indeed to the person going through them. Not everyone experiences out-of-control medical costs, starvation, and deprivation in the world. And not everyone is demanding alternative methods of healing. But some are, and that requires that religion and science start working together to cooperate to solve those problems. Both science and religion, have much to share with one another. Bernie Siegel, Norman Cousins, Paul Pearsall, Dr. Simonton. A hospital in St. Paul where visualization is curing children of cancer are proving that science and religion can come together. It is an idea whose time has come. And Jesus said a long time ago, the fields are already ripe with harvest. Thank you very much, and God bless you.
Thank you, Doctor.
So, this is a program sponsored by the Unity Churches in Minneapolis, St. Paul. There are 5 Unity churches who would love to serve you and to be your ministry. We encourage you to, after this talk is over, to call a number I will repeat at the end of the program and find out where that Unity Church is. The talk today is a part of a series, a 6-part series, in which we will discuss the 5 basic teachings of unity. Today's talk is just an introduction to the basic teachings of unity. In Proverbs 29:18 we read, "Where there is no vision, the people perish." I would like to augment that statement by saying that where the vision doesn't have a commitment, where people do not honor the vision perishes. Not so with Charles and Myrtle Fillmore. They had a vision. They had a vision of what God was like and how God related to people. And after working with that concept and those concepts in their own lives, they took the vision out into the world, and it became what we know today as unity. Unity is a non-denominational religion. It is one that accepts everyone as they are. It is a religion that allows you to be who you are. And we feel that is one of the most important parts of unity. I might add that before Charles and Myrtle brought this healing to the world, this healing ministry to the world, they healed themselves. Myrtle was ill with tuberculosis, and Charles had a leg that was about 4 to 6 inches shorter than the other one. By the time he made his transition in the late 90s, that leg had been elongated, and it was about as long, not quite, but about as long as the other one. In our talks in the future and today, we will be using information that is from a booklet that I would like to have you send for. And I will tell you about it now and then repeat the address later on in the program. The booklet is called Keys to the Kingdom. It is a group of writings by Unity writers. It tells about what these teachings are. It will give you a very handy means of reference when the program's over, and if you wonder what the basic teachings of Unity are about. These teachings are not new. These teachings have been going on through the ages. It is just that in our eagerness to be more religious, more ceremonious, we have forgotten to address the five basic teachings of Unity, which make up such an important part of what Unity teaches. Now, these are not the only things that Unity teaches, I might add. They are just basic, very basic teachings. I would like to ask you to do yourself a favor as you are listening to these talks. Don't make it a judgment call. Don't try to figure out anything until the end of the program, end of the series of programs, because very often what you think might be ridiculous or not to your liking, or something that you may be a little bit unhappy with, doesn't quite comply with what you have been taught, may turn out to be okay at the end of the program when further explanation of the teaching has come about. So just listen to each one of the 5 succeeding weeks and see what those teachings are all about. If by chance, and I hope you really do find something here that you can use, something that you can make part of your own life. Remember, Unity does not ask you to leave your church or to change your ideas, but we do really want you to use what we teach. So if you find that you have something, you see something in these teachings that you can use on a daily basis, we want you to use them. I encourage you to make use of them. The 5 basic teachings begin with, there is one presence and one power in the universe, God the good, omnipotent. This is the basic teaching upon which everything else in Unity is based. That teaching goes through every one of the other teachings in one way or another, and throughout the weeks we will see that happen. The second basic teaching of Unity is that there is a spark of divinity in each one of us. And that spark of divinity is in everyone on the face of the globe. It's a very interesting concept, and it is one that we will enlarge upon in our 3rd week. The third teaching of Unity is that prayer and meditation bring us into harmony with God and with ourselves. We want to be sure that we listen to that lesson because that is so basic to Unity. Prayer was started by Myrtle Fillmore. Prayer is the basis of Unity. Silent Unity is based on prayer. The 4th teaching of Unity is that we govern our lives by the thoughts that we hold on to. And so we have what we call the law of mind action. The law of mind action is an interesting concept, and I am sure when you listen to the 5th program in our series, you will find out many things that will allow you to make changes in your life. I would also say that the 5th teaching is also very important. In fact, they're all important. The 5th teaching is that we can know about these teachings, we can understand those teachings, but if we don't make use of them, they really are of very little value to us. So in our talk on the 6th week, we will discuss how to use these teachings in our lives and how they apply to every facet of our lives. I would like to encourage you to write for the booklet because it will give you a very good reference to what we are teaching through the weeks. It is the Keys to the Kingdom, and you write to Unity School of Christianity, Unity Village, 64065. Before I end this program, I will repeat the address one more time. I would also like to tell you that we have 5 churches in Unity, the Unity denomination in Minneapolis, St. Paul area. They would, any one of them would welcome you. Unity is not a dogmatic religion. It is not confined to any one thing. So you may have to visit more than one church before you find one that really suits you. And you are welcome, and we would like to have you attend any one or all of them. If you want to know where the Unity Church is nearest to you, I ask you to call 885-6664. The secretary at Unity South Minneapolis will tell you where the nearest Unity Church is. Again, the address for the booklet, Keys to the Kingdom, is Unity School of Christianity, Unity Village, Missouri, 64065. And until we see each other again next week, when we will discuss the one presence and the one power, I richly bless you.